They buried Allan Were in silence, but greed spoke first. Before the last prayer ended, his children were already arguing. Voices rose, fingers pointed, lawyers whispered. And in the front row, a small 9-year-old girl was pulled away from the family bench like she didn't belong. Amara Were didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just held her worn school bag and stared at the coffin, waiting for a father who would never answer. "She's not blood," someone said loudly. Phones lifted. The pastor froze. Then so softly, almost no one noticed, the coffin shifted. Not enough to stop the burial. Just enough to haunt the moment. Because if Allan Were was truly gone, why did this feel like a test? Quick question for you. Watching, what country are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? If stories about truth, justice, and hidden love move you, subscribe and stay with us. The day after Allan Were's burial, the mansion on Ngong Road no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room, cold, echoing, filled with people pretending to mourn while calculating their next move. Allan had been a man of order. Even in life, his presence controlled the air around him. He woke before dawn, demanded punctuality, hated waste, and spoke little. His wealth had not come from spectacle, but from discipline. Where holdings had grown from a modest logistics company into a regional empire, because Allan trusted systems more than people and principles more than blood. Now he was gone, and the order he imposed vanished with him. Victor Were wasted no time stepping into the role he believed had always been his. At 40, he carried himself like a man already accustomed to power-tailored suits, clipped sentences, eyes that assessed everyone as either useful or disposable. On the morning after the funeral, he called a meeting in the main living room and sat in his father's chair. No one stopped him. Lydia arrived next, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She did not wear black. She wore cream, elegant, deliberate, defiant. Mourning in her mind was a performance best kept short. She kissed Victor lightly on the cheek, then took a seat opposite him, crossing her legs as if attending a board meeting. Daniel came last. He hovered near the doorway for a moment before entering, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes darting from his siblings to the servants lining the walls. He looked like a man who knew the game was rigged but was too afraid to leave the table. And then there was Amara. She stood near the staircase, half hidden behind a column, holding her school bag against her chest. It was the same bag she had carried to the funeral. No one had told her to change. No one had asked if she had eaten. Mrs. Beatrice Nanjala, and the house manager who had worked for Allan for over 20 years, noticed her immediately. Their eyes met briefly. Beatrice opened her mouth as if to speak, but Victor cleared his throat loudly. "Let's begin," he said. Amara flinched at the sound of his voice. Victor spoke first about logistics, security arrangements, media statements, condolences from politicians and business partners. Lydia added notes about freezing certain accounts until the will is clarified. Daniel nodded along occasionally, murmuring agreement, though it was unclear with whom. No one mentioned Allan as a father. No one mentioned Amara at all. By the time the meeting ended, the future of Were Holdings had been discussed in detail. The future of the child Allan had adopted had not. Later that afternoon, the house began to change in quieter ways. Amara noticed first at dinner. She waited in her usual seat at the far end of the table, close enough to listen, far enough to be ignored. But dinner came and went, and no plate was placed in front of her. She watched as Victor spoke animatedly to Lydia about legal advisors. She watched Daniel eat quickly, avoiding her gaze. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. When the table cleared, she quietly stood and walked toward the kitchen. One of the cooks stopped her gently. "I'm sorry, little one," the woman whispered. "We were told not today." Amara nodded. "It's "It's okay," she said softly, though it wasn't. That night she returned to her small bedroom at the back of the house, the one Allan had chosen for her because it faced the garden. He had said she slept better with trees outside her window. She sat on her bed, opened her school bag, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Dear Daddy," she wrote slowly, her handwriting careful. "Today the house is very loud, but no one is laughing. I think they are angry. I tried to stay quiet like you taught me. I hope that is okay." She paused and then added, "I miss you." Downstairs, Victor stood in Allan's study opening drawers that had never been opened without permission. He found nothing useful. Allan had always kept his most important thoughts elsewhere. Lydia stood behind him, arms crossed. "She's still here," she said flatly. Victor didn't need to ask who she meant. "The will hasn't been read yet," he replied. "Until then, we can't do anything obvious." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "She's just a child." Victor turned sharply. "She's a variable." The word hung in the air. "She doesn't belong here," Lydia added. "Everyone knows she was adopted out of pity." Father was sentimental near the end. Daniel said nothing more. Over the next few days, Amara learned what invisibility truly meant. Her school driver was reassigned. She was told to walk. Her allowance disappeared. Her name vanished from household lists. Servants who once smiled at her now looked away, not out of cruelty, but fear. Only Mrs. Nanjala dared to slip her fruit in the evenings or straighten her blanket when no one was watching. "He would never allow this," the older woman whispered once. Amara shook her head. "Daddy said I must not cause trouble." Meanwhile, where holdings began to tremble. Emails went unanswered. Board members demanded clarity. A regional partner pulled out of a joint venture, citing leadership uncertainty. Victor responded with aggression, Lydia with manipulation, Daniel with silence. At night, Victor drank alone in the study. Lydia made phone calls behind locked doors. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of Amara at the funeral, standing alone, holding her bag, waiting for a man who never came. And somewhere far from the mansion, in a quiet, controlled space, where screens glowed softly and files were neatly labeled, a man watched. He watched Victor's arrogance unfold exactly as expected. He watched Lydia's calculations sharpen into cruelty. He watched Daniel hesitate and choose comfort over courage. And when the camera shifted briefly to a small girl writing a letter by the light of a bedside lamp, Allan Were closed his eyes. The test had begun. The reading of Allan Were's will took place 3 days after the funeral, in a glass-walled conference room at the headquarters of Were Holdings. The location was deliberate. Allan had hated sentimentality in business. If his legacy was to be divided, it would be done where numbers ruled, not tears. Victor arrived early, dressed in a charcoal suit that mirrored his confidence. He took the seat closest to the head of the table, placing his phone face down, as if nothing in the world could interrupt him. Lydia followed, calm and composed, her expression carefully neutral. She greeted the board members with polite smiles, already calculating who might be useful once the ink dried. Daniel came last, rubbing his palms together nervously. He chose a seat halfway down the table, far from Victor, far from confrontation. Amara was not invited. She waited instead in the outer lobby with Mrs. Nanjala, her legs swinging slightly above the floor as she sat on a leather chair too big for her small body. She wore a simple blue dress, clean but old. Her school bag rested at her feet. Inside the conference room, the lawyer stood. Mr. Peter Langat had served as Allan Were's legal counsel for over a decade. He was a careful man, known for precision and restraint. As he opened the leather folder before him, the room fell silent. "This," he began, "is the preliminary reading of the last will and testament of Allan Were." Victor leaned back, folding his arms. The final distribution of assets, Langat continued, will not occur today. The silence cracked. Victor sat forward. What do you mean? Not today. Langat did not flinch. Per the deceased's instructions, all major assets, shares, properties, offshore accounts are frozen for a period of 6 months. Lydia's smile tightened. That's absurd. The company needs leadership. It has leadership, Langat replied evenly. The board remains intact. Operational control continues under existing governance. Victor's jaw clenched. There is Langat went on a condition attached to the release of the estate. Daniel shifted in his chair. What kind of condition? Langat turned a page. A character assessment. The words seemed almost laughable in the room of glass and steel. A what? Victor scoffed. A 6-month evaluation, Langat clarified, to determine the moral fitness of the beneficiaries. Lydia let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're telling us our father turned his inheritance into a school exam? Langat met her gaze. Those were his exact words. Victor stood abruptly. This is nonsense. We are his children. Langat nodded, which is precisely why the clause applies to you. He paused, then added, all of you. Daniel frowned. All. Langat flipped another page. All legal heirs named in the will. Victor froze. Legal heirs include biological and adopted children, Langat read. Without distinction. The room went still. She's not even here, Lydia said sharply. Surely this doesn't concern, it concerns Amara. Where Langat interrupted calmly, explicitly. Victor slammed his palm on the table. That child has no claim to this company. She has no financial allocation, Langat agreed. At this stage. Lydia exhaled relieved until Langat continued. However, he said the will mandates that Amara Were must remain under the care of the Were family for the duration of the assessment. Daniel looked up. Care, yes, Langat said. Housing, education, emotional welfare. Any failure to meet these conditions will be documented. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. So we're being judged on how we babysit. Langat's voice was firm. You are being judged on how you treat the weakest member of your family. The sentence landed heavily. Furthermore, Langat added, Amara's well-being will be independently monitored. Victor's eyes narrowed. By whom? Langat closed the folder. That information will be disclosed in due time. The meeting ended shortly after. Victor left the room first, his steps sharp, his face dark with fury. Lydia followed, already dialing her phone. Daniel lingered, staring at the empty chair at the far end of the table, the one that might have been Amara's. Outside, Amara looked up when the door opened. Is it finished? She asked softly. No one answered her. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere shifted again, this time with intention. Victor called Lydia into the study that evening. Daniel hovered nearby, pretending to read. She's not getting a cent, Victor said. But she's now a liability. She always was, Lydia replied. Now she's leverage. Daniel looked up. What are you saying? Victor turned to him. I'm saying we do exactly what the will requires. Nothing more. Lydia smiled faintly. We keep her alive, educated and quiet. And if she complains, Daniel asked. She won't, Lydia said. Children like her never do. Upstairs, Amara sat on her bed, listening to voices rise and fall through the walls. She couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Angry, sharp, cold. She opened her school bag and pulled out her notebook again. Dear Daddy, she wrote they talked about you today in a big room with glass walls. I wasn't allowed inside. That's okay. I waited. She paused, chewing the end of her pencil. They say I must stay here now. I will try to be good. She added one last line carefully. You said being kind. was the only thing that mattered. Down the hall, Mrs. Nanjala watched the light under Amara's door and felt her chest tighten. This was not what Allan would have wanted. Far away in a room filled with screens and files, Allan Were watched the will reading from multiple angles. He saw Victor's fury, Lydia's calculation, Daniel's hesitation. And when Langat spoke Amara's name, Allan leaned forward. Now he murmured to no one, "Let us see." Cruelty did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as procedure. The first change was subtle. Amara's breakfast tray stopped appearing outside her room. When she went down to the dining hall, the table was already cleared, the chairs pushed in neatly, as if she had simply been forgotten. The second change followed soon after. Her school driver was reassigned temporarily. Victor said it without looking at her, his eyes fixed on his phone. "You can walk," he added. "It's good for discipline." The walk was long, nearly an hour each way. Amara did not complain. She woke earlier, tied her shoes carefully, and left the house before the sun fully rose. Mrs. Nanjala would sometimes slip a boiled egg into her pocket when no one was watching. "Eat slowly," the older woman whispered, "and don't let them see." At school, Amara became quieter than before. She stopped raising her hand. She stopped asking questions. She sat in the back of the classroom and wrote in her notebook whenever the noise grew too loud. At home, Lydia began enforcing rules that had never existed. No wandering after sunset. No touching the piano. No entering the study. No speaking during meetings. Each rule was delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Daniel watched all of this unfold with growing discomfort. Once late at night, he passed Amara in the hallway as she carried a small plate of leftovers to her room. "Why don't you just tell them?" he asked quietly. Amara looked up at him confused. "Tell them what? That you're hungry," Daniel said. "That you're tired." She shook her head. "Daddy said I should never beg." The word struck him like a blow. "Daddy," she repeated softly, as if the name itself were a comfort. Daniel said nothing more. Victor, meanwhile, made his intentions clear during a private meeting with Lydia. "The will doesn't say we have to be kind," he said. "It says we have to provide." Lydia nodded. "Minimum compliance. So long as she's fed, clothed, and educated on paper, we're safe." "And emotionally?" Lydia asked, arching an eyebrow. Victor shrugged. "Feelings aren't audited." Upstairs, Amara wrote her letters. Every night she sat on her bed with her notebook balanced on her knees, the small desk Allan had bought her pushed against the wall. She wrote about school, about the trees in the garden losing their leaves, about Mrs. Nanjala's quiet kindness. She did not write about the hunger. She did not write about the way her chest tightened when voices rose downstairs. She did not write about the fear that sometimes woke her in the night, sharp and sudden, like she had done something wrong but could not remember what. Instead, she wrote this: "Dear Daddy, I am trying to be brave. I remember what you said about storms. You said they show us which houses were built well. I hope I am not breaking." One evening, Victor found her sitting on the floor outside the study door, her ear pressed lightly against the wood. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Amara jumped to her feet. "I'm sorry. I was just spying." Victor finished coldly. "No," she said quickly. "I was waiting." "For what? For when the room is quiet again." Victor stared at her for a long moment, then laughed softly. "You're a strange child." He closed the study door in her face. The next morning, her allowance, small as it was, disappeared entirely. Mrs. Nanjala protested quietly. "Sir," the child Victor raised a hand. "The child is not your concern." "She was Allan's concern," Mrs. Nanjala said before she could stop herself. Victor's eyes hardened. "Watch your place." From that day on, the servants kept their distance, not because they agreed, but because they were afraid. Weeks passed. Amara grew thinner. Her clothes hung looser on her small frame. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, became watchful, cautious. At school, a teacher noticed the change. Amara, Miss Grace Mwangi, said gently after class one afternoon, "Are you eating enough?" Amara nodded too quickly. "Yes, miss." Grace studied her for a moment, unconvinced. "If you ever need anything," she said, "you can talk to me." Amara smiled politely. She had learned that adults often said such things without meaning them. Back at the mansion, tension mounted. Where holdings continued to wobble. A regional contract was delayed. A board member resigned, citing ethical concerns. Victor responded by tightening his grip, issuing orders, threatening legal action. Lydia moved quietly, shifting assets, making calls, preparing exit strategies. Daniel began spending more time away from the house. And Amara became smaller still. One evening, she collapsed while walking home from school. She woke up on a bench near the gate, Mrs. Nanjala fanning her face, fear etched deep into her features. "She needs to see a doctor," the woman insisted. Victor arrived moments later, irritated. "She fainted," he said dismissively. "Children do that." "She hasn't eaten properly in days," Mrs. Nanjala shot back. Victor's gaze flicked to Amara, who was slowly sitting up, embarrassed. "Is that true?" he asked. Amara opened her mouth, then closed it again. "She's fine," Lydia said smoothly, appearing beside them. "A little drama goes a long way with children." Amara lowered her eyes. That night, she wrote her shortest letter yet. "Dear Daddy, today, I felt very tired. But I remembered your voice. You said, 'Kindness is quiet, but it lasts.' I will try to last." Far away, Allan Were watched the footage with clenched fists. This was harder than he had imagined. He had anticipated cruelty, but not its ease. Not how quickly his children discarded restraint when they believed no one was watching. He paused the screen on Amara's face, pale and determined. "Enough," he whispered. But the test was not over. Not yet. The first crack inside Were holdings appeared quietly. The way structural damage always does, out of sight, ignored until it spread. Victor announced his interim authority with a confident email sent to the entire executive team. The subject line was sharp and final, operational continuity directive. He signed it as acting executive lead, a title he had invented for himself. Some executives complied immediately. Others hesitated. By the end of the week, the hesitation turned into resistance. A logistics partner in Mombasa delayed shipments, citing unpaid guarantees. A Nairobi-based bank froze a line of credit pending clarity of succession. At a board subcommittee meeting, a senior director openly questioned Victor's unilateral decisions. "Your father never acted without consensus," the man said carefully. Victor's smile did not reach his eyes. "My father is no longer here." The words echoed more loudly than he intended. At the mansion, Lydia sensed the shift and adjusted her strategy. She spent long hours on private calls, her voice low, her laptop always angled away from prying eyes. She began transferring small but frequent sums into accounts registered under shell companies. Nothing obvious, nothing illegal. Just preparation. Daniel noticed. He said nothing. Amara noticed too, though she didn't understand what she was seeing. She only knew that Lydia's door was always locked now, and that the house felt heavier every day. One afternoon, as Amara passed the study on her way upstairs, she heard voices. Victor's voice was sharp. "We can't afford mistakes right now." Another voice answered, male, unfamiliar. "Your father's structures were layered. He didn't centralize risk." And Victor snapped. "And someone is accessing restricted files." Amara froze. She stood very still, her heart pounding so loudly, she was sure they would hear it through the door. There's activity from a dormant oversight channel, the man continued. It's subtle, but it's there. Victor swore under his breath. Find out who. Yes, sir. The door opened suddenly. Amara barely had time to step back before Victor emerged. Their eyes met. How long have you been standing there? He demanded. Amara swallowed. I was going to my room. Did you hear anything? She shook her head. It wasn't entirely a lie. She hadn't understood the words, only the danger in them. Victor studied her face, searching for something, fear perhaps. When he found only confusion, he waved her away impatiently. Go. She fled upstairs, her hands trembling. That night she dreamed of Allan for the first time since the funeral. He stood in the garden just beyond the mango tree, watching her with the same calm expression he always wore when she was frightened. Storms, he said gently. Remember. She woke before dawn, the words still echoing in her chest. The next morning, Amara left early for school, her school bag heavier than usual. Inside it was her notebook, her lunch container empty, and a folded letter she had written the night before, but had not yet sealed. At the gate she paused. Across the street, a black sedan idled quietly. The windows were tinted, the engine barely audible. She stared at it for a moment, unsure why it unsettled her, then continued on her way. Inside the car, a man lowered his binoculars and made a note. Subject appears weaker, still compliant. Later that day, Victor convened an emergency executive briefing at headquarters. Lydia joined via video call. Daniel attended in person, silent as ever. We are bleeding confidence, Victor said bluntly. Someone is interfering. A board member raised a hand. With respect, Victor, the interference may be internal. Victor's eyes flashed. Are you accusing me? I'm saying, the man replied calmly, that your father designed safeguards for a reason. The room grew tense. We need transparency, another director added, and accountability. Victor leaned forward. You want accountability? Fine. We start by identifying weak links. His gaze swept the room and paused on Daniel. Daniel stiffened. What, you've been absent, Victor said. Unreliable. Daniel clenched his jaw. I've been following protocol. Father's protocol, Victor shot back, which is outdated. The meeting ended without resolution. As the executives filed out, Victor remained behind, staring at the city through the glass wall. For the first time since the funeral, doubt flickered across his face. Someone was watching. He could feel it. Back at school, Amara sat alone during lunch break, pretending to read while her classmates played nearby. Her stomach growled softly. She ignored it. Ms. Grace Mwangi noticed. She approached slowly, careful not to startle the girl. Amara, she said gently, did you bring lunch today? Amara hesitated, then shook her head. Grace crouched down to her level. Why, Amara stared at the ground. I forgot. Grace knew that wasn't true. She opened her own lunch bag and placed a wrapped sandwich beside Amara. Eat, she said simply. Amara's eyes filled with tears. She ate slowly as Mrs. Nanjala had taught her. That evening, Amara returned home, later than usual. As she entered the side corridor, she heard Lydia's voice from the sitting room. She's a risk, Lydia was saying. She listens. She sees. She's 9. Daniel protested weakly. She's Allan's, Lydia replied. That's enough. Amara stopped breathing. Victor spoke next. We need to control exposure, school staff access. And the will, Lydia asked. Victor's voice lowered. The will is watching us. Amara backed away silently, her heart racing. She did not go to her room. Instead, she slipped into the garden, crouched beneath the mango tree, and opened her school bag. She pulled out her notebook and began to write with shaking hands. Dear Daddy, something is wrong. They are scared. I don't know of what. You said fear shows the truth of people. I am trying to remember everything you taught me. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her chest. From the black sedan across the street, the man watched her through the trees. He made another note. She writes to him every night. He closed the notebook and reached for his phone. It's time, he said quietly. Phase 2. Far away, Allan Were watched the same footage from a different screen. His jaw tightened. The cracks were widening, and soon the truth would begin to leak through them. Before Amara ever slept beneath the roof of the Were mansion, before she learned to whisper instead of speak, before she knew the weight of being unwanted, Allan Were had already noticed her. It happened 8 years earlier during a visit he never intended to make public. Allan had gone to the outskirts of Kisumu to inspect a small medical outreach his foundation quietly funded. He disliked ceremonies. He preferred to arrive unannounced, observe, and leave without applause. That afternoon, rain fell hard and sudden, flooding the dirt road and delaying his departure. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of antiseptic and damp clothes. Children sat on benches, some crying, others too tired to make noise. That was when he saw her. Amara sat alone near the back wall, her feet not touching the ground. She held a cracked plastic cup with both hands staring into it, as if it contained something precious. She did not cry. She did not speak. Allan paused. "Who is that child?" he asked the nurse quietly. The nurse followed his gaze and sighed. "She came in this morning. No parents, no records. We think she was left overnight." Allan watched Amara for a long moment. "Has she eaten?" "Yes," the nurse said. "She shared her portion with another child." That answer stayed with him. Later, as Allan prepared to leave, he felt a small tug at the edge of his coat. He looked down. Amara was standing there, her eyes wide but steady. "Sir," she said softly. "Are you lost?" He was surprised. "No," he replied. "Are you?" She thought about that. "I don't think so," she said. "I'm just waiting." "For whom?" Allan asked. She shrugged. "Someone." Something in her voice, patient, unafraid, struck him deeply. He returned to Nairobi that night, but Amara did not leave his thoughts. Within weeks, he arranged for her temporary care. Within months, he adopted her quietly without press conferences or public statements. He added her name to the family register and instructed his legal team to treat her status as equal under the law. But Allan did not bring her into the mansion immediately. Instead, he spent time with her. He took her to parks, to libraries, to small cafes where no one recognized him. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how she reacted to kindness, never demanding more, never assuming it would last. One afternoon, when she was 5, he asked her a question. "If everyone left," he said gently, "what would you keep?" Amara thought carefully. "The things that don't make noise," she said. He smiled then, a rare, genuine smile. It was during those early months that Allan began to understand something uncomfortable about his own family. Victor tolerated Amara's presence, but never engaged. Lydia smiled at her, but spoke as if she were invisible. Daniel tried sometimes, but withdrew when it became inconvenient. Amara noticed everything. One evening, after a tense family dinner, she approached Allan quietly. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. "No," Allan replied immediately. "Then why do they look at me like that?" He knelt to her level. "Because some people think love is something you lose when you share it." She considered this. "Is that true?" "No," Allan said firmly. "But many believe it." That was the night he decided to test them. Not then. Not immediately. But one day. Back in the present, Allan sat alone in the observation room, surrounded by screens and files. He watched footage from the school, from the mansion, from the boardroom. He listened to recorded conversations, read transcripts, studied timelines. He had designed the assessment carefully. 6 months. Independent oversight. Clear thresholds. What he had not anticipated was how quickly the mask would fall. He replayed a clip of Victor dismissing Mrs. Nanjala. Another of Lydia laughing softly as Amara fainted. Another of Daniel turning away when the girl needed him most. Allan closed his eyes. "I gave you time," he murmured. In the mansion, Amara's world continued to narrow. After overhearing Victor and Lydia's conversation, she stopped lingering in shared spaces. She moved through the house like a shadow, careful not to draw attention. Mrs. Nanjala found her one evening sitting on the floor beside her bed, sorting through old drawings. "These are from when Daddy took me to the lake," Amara said quietly, holding one up. "He said water remembers where it comes from." Mrs. Nanjala swallowed. "Your father was a wise man." Amara looked up. "Do you think he can still see me?" The older woman hesitated. "I don't know. I hope so," Amara said. "Because sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing." The next morning, Victor made a decision. He summoned Lydia and Daniel to the study. "This situation is unstable," he said. "The board is restless. The girl is a liability." Daniel frowned. "What are you proposing?" Victor leaned back. "We move her, somewhere controlled." Lydia nodded. "A boarding school?" "A cheap one," Victor added. "Enough to satisfy the will, not enough to attract attention." Daniel hesitated. "She's been through enough." Victor's gaze hardened. "You want to fail the assessment?" That ended the discussion. Amara was told that afternoon. "You're going to a new school," Lydia said brightly. "It will be good for you." When Amara asked, "Tomorrow." Amara nodded. She had learned not to ask questions. That night she packed her bag carefully. Her clothes, her notebook, the small wooden bracelet Allan had given her on her 7th birthday. She wrote one last letter before sleeping. "Dear Daddy, they are sending me away. I'm not scared. You said leaving doesn't mean losing. I will remember who I am." She folded the letter and tucked it inside her notebook. Across the city, Allan watched the footage of Lydia delivering the news, his hands curled into fists. "This," he said quietly, "is where the line is crossed." He turned to the man standing beside him, Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah. "Prepare the next phase," Allan said. "But do not intervene yet." Mensah nodded, and the child, Allan's voice softened. "Watch her closely." The storm Allan had warned Amara about was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The boarding school sat on the edge of a dry plain, far from the noise of Nairobi and even farther from kindness. It was called Green Ridge Academy, though there was nothing green about it. The paint on the dormitory walls peeled in long strips, the iron beds creaked under thin mattresses, and the classrooms smelled of dust and chalk. The school accepted children who had nowhere else to go and children no one wanted to see. Amara arrived just before sunset. A driver she had never met dropped her small suitcase at the gate, avoided her eyes, and drove away without a word. The dust from the tires settled slowly, leaving her standing alone with her school bag on her back. She did not cry. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and walked inside. From the first night, she understood her place. The matron glanced at her papers and frowned. "Sponsored," she muttered. "That means trouble." Amara was assigned a bed near the door, where cold air crept in at night. The other girls watched her carefully, some with curiosity, others with open disdain. "Why do you talk like that?" one girl asked on the second day, mocking Amara's careful English. "That's how rich people talk," another sneered. "She thinks she's better than us." Amara shook her head. "I don't." They laughed anyway. Food was scarce. Portions were measured with cruelty disguised as discipline. When Amara tried to save part of her meal for later, a supervisor slapped her hand. "You eat when you're told," the woman snapped. At night, Amara lay awake, listening to the sounds of other girls crying softly into their pillows. She pressed her wooden bracelet into her palm and whispered the words Allan had taught her. "Storms show us what stands." Back at the Were mansion, Victor felt lighter. With Amara gone, the house was quieter, easier. No small eyes watching, no silent judgment in the corners. This was the right move, Lydia said over breakfast. Out of sight, out of risk. Daniel said nothing. He stared at the empty chair at the end of the table, his appetite gone. At Were Holdings, the board's pressure increased. Emails from investors grew sharper. A regional newspaper published an article questioning Victor's leadership, citing ethical concerns following the founder's death. Victor blamed everyone but himself. "She's the problem," he snapped one evening, pacing the study. "Her existence complicates everything." Daniel finally spoke. "She's a child." Victor rounded on him. "And you're a coward." Daniel flinched. At Greenridge, Amara's body grew weaker, but something inside her hardened. She woke before dawn to help clean classrooms, not because she was told to, but because the quiet helped her think. She finished her assignments early and used the extra time to write. Every night, she wrote to Allan. "Dear Daddy, the school is loud, but the sky here is big. I think you would like it. Some girls are angry, but I try to remember that anger is heavy to carry." She never mailed the letters. She kept them folded in her notebook like prayers waiting for the right moment. One afternoon during a routine inspection, a visitor arrived at Greenridge. He was well-dressed, calm, and observant. He introduced himself as Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah, a representative from a family trust conducting welfare checks. The staff scrambled. Amara was called into the office confused. Mensah sat across from her, his hands folded neatly on the desk. He did not smile too quickly. He did not rush. "How are you finding the school?" he asked. Amara hesitated. She had learned that honesty often came at a cost. "It's fine," she said carefully. Mensah nodded, as if he expected that answer. "And your family?" She looked down. "They are busy." He studied her face, the hollow cheeks, the guarded eyes. "Do they write to you?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Do you write to them?" Amara's fingers tightened around her notebook. "I write to my father." Mensah's gaze sharpened just slightly. "And what do you say?" She met his eyes for the first time. "That I'm still here." Mensah closed his notebook slowly. "Thank you, Amara," he said. "That will be all." As she left, he remained seated staring at the door long after it closed. That evening, he made a call. "She's deteriorating physically," he reported. "But mentally, she's intact, more than intact." There was a pause on the other end. "Good," Allan Were said quietly, and the others, Mensah, exhaled. They've already failed her. Weeks passed. At Greenridge, Amara collapsed during morning assembly. This time there was no Mrs. Nanjala to catch her. She woke in the infirmary, an IV in her arm, Miss Grace Mwangi standing beside the bed. Grace had followed up after noticing Amara's absence from school records, had asked questions, had refused to accept silence. "You should have told me," Grace said softly. Amara's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't want to cause trouble." Grace felt anger rise in her chest, not at the child, but at the adults who had taught her this lesson. That night, Grace wrote an email to the Were family. She received no reply. She wrote again, this time copying the board's general counsel. The next morning, Mensah appeared again. This time he did not sit. He knelt in front of Amara's bed. "Your father taught you well," he said quietly. Amara looked at him confused. You know him. Mensa smiled not kindly, but truthfully. Better than most. She reached for her notebook. Can you give him something for me? Mensa nodded. Yes. She handed him a folded letter. Tell him, she said, her voice steady despite her weakness, that I kept my promise. Mensa took the letter carefully, as if it were fragile glass. Back in Nairobi, Allan Were read the letter alone. He read it once. Then again. Then he stood up. No more distance, he said. No more watching from behind glass. Mensa hesitated. The assessment period, all rules have limits, Allan replied. And so does cruelty. He turned back to the screen, showing Amara asleep in the infirmary. She stayed, Allan said, when everyone else walked away. The test had reached its breaking point. And soon, so would the truth. Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah did not announce himself when he returned to Nairobi. He rarely did. He moved through the city quietly, checking records, observing patterns, listening more than speaking. To most people, he was just another consultant attached to a wealthy family trust. To Allan Were he was something else entirely, the keeper of boundaries, the witness who could not be bribed. Within days of Amara's collapse at Greenridge Academy, Mensah expanded the scope of his review. He visited Were Holdings first. Victor received him in the executive conference room, flanked by 2 senior managers and Lydia on a video call. Victor's smile was professional, practiced. Mr. Mensah, he said, standing to shake hands. We appreciate your diligence. Mensah returned the handshake politely. My role is observation, not diligence. Victor chuckled as if it were a joke. Of course. Transparency is important to us. Mensah took a seat but did not open his notebook. Instead, he looked around the room, the glass walls, the city beyond them, the subtle tension in the air. I'll be brief, Mensah said. The assessment period is ongoing. I am here to evaluate compliance with the welfare clause. Lydia leaned toward the camera. Amara is enrolled in a reputable boarding school. Her education is uninterrupted. We've followed the will precisely. Mensah nodded. On paper. Victor's smile thinned. If you have concerns, you should raise them formally. I am, Mensah replied calmly. He slid a single photograph across the table. It showed Amara in the infirmary at Greenridge, thin, pale, her wrist wrapped in gauze, an ivy taped to her arm. The room went silent. Daniel, who had been standing near the back, inhaled sharply. That image, Mensah continued, was taken after the child collapsed during morning assembly. Victor's jaw tightened. Children faint. Children faint when they are malnourished, Mensah corrected gently, or stressed beyond their capacity. Lydia recovered first. We were not informed of any medical emergency. Mensah's gaze flicked to her. That is also noted. Victor leaned forward. What exactly are you implying? I am implying, Mensah said evenly, that the spirit of the will is being violated. Victor slammed his hand on the table. We followed the letter. Mensah finally opened his notebook. Allan Were did not design this assessment to reward technical obedience. He closed the notebook again. I will be visiting the school personally, Mensah said, and I will continue monitoring household dynamics. Victor stood abruptly. This is an overreach. Mensah met his eyes without blinking. So was sending a grieving child away to isolation. The meeting ended shortly after. As Mensah left the building, he passed Daniel in the hallway. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. Is Amara going to be okay? Mensah studied him for a long moment. That depends, he said quietly, on who decides to act. Daniel said nothing. The following week, the Were family made a sudden shift in strategy. Victor instructed the communications team to arrange a public charity event, An orphanage visit complete with cameras, donations, and carefully worded speeches. Lydia suggested inviting Amara back for the occasion. She's the perfect symbol, Lydia said. A redeemed family. Victor agreed. A car was dispatched to Greenridge. Amara was still weak when she returned to the mansion. Ms. Grace Mwangi insisted on accompanying her, refusing to let the child travel alone. "This is temporary," Victor told Grace coolly. "We're addressing public misconceptions." Grace stared at him. She's not a misconception. Victor ignored her. That evening, Amara was dressed in a white dress she had never worn before. Her hair was brushed carefully. A camera crew waited in the driveway. Lydia knelt in front of her, smiling brightly. "You'll just stand beside us," she said. "Smile when they ask. You don't need to talk much." Amara nodded. The event unfolded exactly as planned. Victor spoke about legacy. Lydia spoke about compassion. They placed envelopes into grateful hands. The cameras captured every angle. Amara stood quietly between them, her small fingers folded together. When a reporter asked her a question, Lydia answered for her. "She's still shy," Lydia said warmly, "but she knows she's loved." From the edge of the crowd, Mensa watched. He watched how Victor positioned himself between Amara and the reporters, how Lydia's hand tightened around the girl's shoulder when she shifted, how Amara flinched at sudden noise. After the cameras left, the smiles vanished. "Take her back," Victor said to the driver. "Tomorrow." Amara was led away without ceremony. That night, she did not write a letter. She sat on her bed and stared at the wall until sleep claimed her. Mensa returned to his hotel and made his report. "They're performing kindness," he said into the phone. "But they don't understand it." "And the child?" Allan asked. "She still protects them," Mensa replied. "She never speaks against them." There was a long pause. That Allan said, "Finally," is what I feared. The next morning, Ms. Grace Mwangi filed a formal complaint with the Ministry of Education and copied the board's ethics committee. She attached medical reports, attendance records, and her own sworn statement. The response was swift. An emergency audit was announced, not public yet, but unavoidable. Victor received the notice at his desk. "Who did this?" he demanded. Lydia paled. "It must be the teacher." Daniel felt his stomach drop. At Greenridge, Amara was summoned to the headmistress's office. She expected punishment. Instead, she was told she would be transferred temporarily to a monitored facility in Nairobi for recovery. She nodded, too tired to ask questions. As she was escorted out, she glanced back at the dormitory one last time. She did not hate it. It had taught her something important, that loyalty could survive even abandonment, that kindness did not require witnesses, and that storms, no matter how violent, revealed the strength of what remained standing. Far away, Allan Were watched the flurry of responses, emails, calls, subtle panic. The masks were cracking. "Good," he murmured. "Let them scramble." The auditor had arrived, and the test, long hidden behind silence, was finally forcing the truth into the open. The accusation arrived quietly, wrapped in official language and stamped with authority. Amara was sitting in the small recovery room provided by the monitored facility in Nairobi when a woman in a navy blue suit entered, followed by a school administrator she did not recognize. Ms. Grace Mwangi stood up immediately. "What is this about?" Grace asked. The woman adjusted her glasses. "There has been a report filed concerning missing funds from the Greenridge Academy scholarship account." Grace frowned. "That has nothing to do with the name Amara." "Where appears in the internal notes," and the woman continued calmly. "We are required to ask questions." Amara's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "Ask me what," she asked softly. The administrator cleared his throat. A sum equivalent to several months of school fees was withdrawn without authorization. The transaction coincides with the period of your stay. Grace stepped forward. This is absurd. She was hospitalized. We're not making conclusions, the woman said. Only inquiries. But the damage was already done. Within hours, whispers began circulating first among school staff, then among administrators, then quietly through channels that reached the Were mansion. Victor received the call while reviewing documents with Lydia. They're saying what he asked sharply. That the girl may have accessed scholarship funds, Lydia replied, her voice low. It's not confirmed. But it's enough. Victor's eyes narrowed. Enough for what? For distance, Lydia said. For separation. Daniel, who had been listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten. She wouldn't do that. Victor turned to him. You don't know that? I do, Daniel said quietly. I know her. Victor scoffed. You know the idea of her. By evening, the narrative had shifted. A brief internal memo circulated among board members, carefully worded, suggesting that irregularities involving a minor dependent were under review. No names were mentioned. None were needed. At the monitored facility, Amara was escorted to a small office with blank walls and a single table. Do you understand why you're here? The woman in the navy suit asked gently. Amara nodded. They think I took something. Did you? Amara shook her head. No. Have you ever handled money from the school account? No. Do you know how to access it? Amara hesitated, then shook her head again. I don't know how banks work. The woman studied her face for a long moment. She had conducted many interviews like this. She had learned to recognize rehearsed innocence. This was not that. Still, procedure demanded follow-through. We'll need to verify, the woman said. Until then, certain restrictions apply. Grace protested. You're treating her like a criminal. We're treating her like a subject of inquiry, the woman replied. That's different. That night, Amara could not sleep. The room felt smaller than before. The walls pressed in. She sat up in bed, reached for her notebook, and froze. It wasn't there. Her school bag sat open on the chair, its contents neatly arranged. Her clothes, her toothbrush, no notebook. Her heart began to race. She searched the room, then the hallway, then the common area. Nothing. Panic rose in her throat. Those letters were everything. They were the only place she had spoken freely, the only place she had kept her father alive. She returned to her room and sat on the bed, her hands shaking. Miss Grace arrived moments later, alerted by the nurse. They took it, Grace said quietly, as part of the inquiry. Amara's eyes filled with tears for the first time in weeks. It has my letters, she whispered. Grace sat beside her. We'll get it back. Amara shook her head slowly. They won't understand them. Grace did not answer, because she knew that was true. Across the city, Mensa received the update and went still. They're framing her, he said flatly into the phone. Allan Were listened without interrupting. The transaction trail, Allan asked. Clean, Mensa replied. The withdrawal was authorized using a legacy access code. Allan's jaw tightened, which only 3 people possess. Yes, Victor, Allan said quietly. Or Lydia, Mensa added. Possibly both. Allan closed his eyes. They've crossed another line, he said, and this one leaves a record. The next morning, Amara was summoned again. This time the room held more people. 2 officials, a legal observer, a representative from the school network. The woman in the navy suit spoke first. We've reviewed preliminary findings. There is no direct evidence of wrongdoing on your part. Amara exhaled shakily. However, the woman continued. Questions remain about access. Grace clenched her fists. Amara raised her hand slightly. May I say something? The room paused. She stood slowly, her small frame steady despite the fear twisting inside her. "I didn't take the money," she said. "But if someone thinks I did, I'm sorry." The officials exchanged glances. "I don't know how to explain things like adults," Amara continued. "But I know this: my father taught me that what we protect shows who we are." She swallowed. "I protected my letters, and someone took them." Silence filled the room. The woman in the navy suit leaned forward. "What letters?" Amara hesitated, then spoke. "Letters I write to my father. He told me to write when I feel lost." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. The legal observer cleared his throat. "Is your father alive?" Amara shook her head. "They say he's gone." Then she added very softly, "But I still talk to him." The meeting ended shortly after. No charges were filed. No apology was offered. Amara was cleared, but not restored. The damage lingered. At the mansion, Victor felt a surge of relief when he heard the outcome. "Good," he said. "Now keep her out of sight." Lydia nodded. "The board will forget this." Daniel stood silently by the window, his reflection staring back at him like an accusation. That evening, Mensah retrieved Amara's notebook from evidence storage under a formal request. He read the letters alone. He did not skim. He read every word. When he finished, he sat for a long time without moving. Then he drove straight to Allan. Allan read the notebook that night. He read about hunger disguised as obedience, about loneliness mistaken for strength, about a child who stayed loyal even when loyalty cost her everything. When he reached the last letter, Allan closed the notebook slowly. "She asked for nothing," he said hoarsely. "Nothing but to stay." Mensah nodded. "And they tried to destroy even that." Allan stood. "The next phase begins now," he said. "No more shadows." He looked at the screen showing Amara asleep, her face drawn, but peaceful. "They wanted to erase her," Allan said quietly. "Instead, they've written their own verdict." The morning after the inquiry closed, Amara woke to a silence that felt unfamiliar. Not the sharp, anxious quiet she had grown used to, but something steadier. The recovery facility was calmer that day. Nurses moved with purpose instead of suspicion. The door to her room was no longer guarded. Mrs. Grace Mwangi arrived just after breakfast. "You're cleared," she said softly, pulling a chair beside the bed. "Completely." Amara nodded, though relief did not rush in the way Grace expected. It hovered instead, careful, uncertain. "Does that mean I can go back?" Amara asked. Grace hesitated. "Back? Where?" The word landed heavily between them. Amara looked down at her hands. "To the house." Grace chose her words carefully. "For now, you'll stay here, where you're safe." Amara absorbed this without protest. Safety had become a concept she understood in theory more than practice. That afternoon, Grace sat with Amara under the jacaranda tree in the facility's courtyard. Purple petals drifted down slowly, settling on the ground like quiet promises. "Do you remember what your father used to say when you were afraid?" Grace asked. Amara smiled faintly. "He said fear tells us where we should look closer." Grace nodded. "That's very wise." He also said, Amara added, "the truth doesn't rush. It waits." Grace looked at her in surprise. "He said that?" "Yes," Amara replied. "He said if you chase truth, it hides. But if you stand still, it finds you." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. This was not the language of a child who had been loved lightly. This was the inheritance of time. At the Were mansion, pressure mounted. Victor received a call from the board's ethics committee requesting a comprehensive review of welfare compliance. Lydia received a separate notice from the bank asking for clarification on recent transfers. Daniel received nothing but felt everything. He sat alone in Allan's study that evening, staring at the bookshelf his father had built himself. He remembered being 10, standing in this same room watching Allan label files with neat, careful handwriting. Order, Allan had said then, is a form of respect. Daniel hadn't understood it at the time. Now he did. He reached into the drawer of the desk, the one Victor had never opened because it looked too ordinary, and found a thin envelope. No seal. Just his name written in Allan's hand. He opened it with shaking fingers. Daniel, if you are reading this, it means you are uncertain. That is not a weakness. It is a beginning. Daniel sank into the chair, breath caught in his throat. Watch how they treat the one who cannot protect herself. Then decide who you want to be. The letter ended there. Daniel sat in silence for a long time. The next morning he did something he had not done since the funeral. He went to see Amara. He did not announce himself. He did not bring gifts or apologies rehearsed in the mirror. He simply arrived at the facility and asked for her. Amara was sitting in the courtyard with Grace when she saw him. Her first instinct was to stand. Amara, Daniel said quickly, "Please stay." She sat back down slowly, watching him with guarded eyes. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I should have done more." Amara studied his face as if searching for something familiar. "You were scared," she said. Daniel swallowed. "Yes." She nodded. "So was I." Grace excused herself quietly, leaving them alone. Daniel sat on the edge of the bench. "They took your letters," he said. "I didn't know." "It's okay," Amara replied. "They gave them back." Daniel looked at her surprised. "They did," she nodded. "Mr. Mensah brought them." Daniel stiffened. Mensah. Amara tilted her head. "You know him." Daniel exhaled. "I think my father trusted him." Amara smiled faintly. "So do I." That night, Mensah met Allan in person for the first time since the death. They stood in a quiet room overlooking the city. Screens were dark, files closed. "The child is stable," Mensah reported, "but the damage is deep." Allan nodded. "I expected that." "Victor and Lydia are escalating," Mensah continued. "They believe they can outpace the process." "They always did," Allan replied. Mensah hesitated, and Daniel Allan looked toward the window. Daniel is standing at a crossroads. Mensah reached into his briefcase and pulled out Amara's notebook. "She asked me to give this to you. Again." Allan took it carefully. "She still writes," Mensah added, "even after everything." Allan opened the notebook to a recent entry. "Dear Daddy, I don't know what happens next, but I think storms don't come to punish us. They come to show us who stays." Allan closed the notebook, his eyes burning. "It's time," he said quietly. The next day, Mensah delivered formal notices. The board would convene an emergency session in 72 hours. Attendance mandatory. The agenda: succession ethics and compliance with the founder's will. Victor reacted with fury. Lydia with calculation. Daniel reacted with fear and then resolve. He went back to Allan's study and opened the desk drawer again. There was nothing else inside. No more letters. Just the echo of his father's voice. Decide who you want to be. At the facility, Grace received confirmation that Amara would be required to attend the board session, not as an accused, but as a protected witness. When Grace told her, Amara nodded calmly. "Will it be loud?" she asked. "Yes," Grace admitted. "Then I'll listen carefully," Amara said. That night, Amara wrote one more letter. "Dear Daddy, they are calling me to a big room again. I'm not scared this time. You said truth doesn't rush. I think it's walking now." She folded the letter and placed it in her notebook. Across the city, Allan Were stood alone, no screens between him and the night. Their choices are set, he murmured. Now they will meet them. The boardroom lights would soon turn on, and when they did, there would be no place left to hide. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Were Holdings filled slowly like a courtroom before a verdict. Executives arrived, first men and women in dark suits, voices low, eyes wary. Legal counsel followed, carrying folders thicker than usual. Members of the ethics committee took their seats without greeting one another. No one smiled. At exactly 9 o'clock, Victor Were entered. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed control was a birthright. Lydia followed a step behind her expression, composed, her movements precise. Daniel arrived last, pausing briefly at the door, as if considering turning back, then taking an empty seat near the middle of the table. An empty chair stood at the far end, reserved, the chair Allan Were used to occupy. Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah stood near the glass wall reviewing notes. He did not sit. He rarely did during moments like this. "Let's begin," the board chair said, clearing his throat. "This emergency session has been called under Clause 14 of the Founder's Will." Victor leaned forward. "With respect, this is unnecessary. We've addressed all compliance concerns." Mensah lifted his gaze. "You've addressed appearances." A murmur rippled through the room. The chair raised a hand. "Mr. Mensah will lead today's proceedings." Victor stiffened. On what authority? Mensah did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the door. It opened. Ms. Grace Mwangi entered first, her posture steady, her eyes alert. Behind her walked Amara. She wore a simple blue dress. Her hair was neatly braided. Her school bag hung from her shoulder, though she held it close, as if it were armor. The room went silent. Lydia inhaled sharply. Victor's expression hardened. Amara stopped beside the reserved chair and looked around. Faces stared back at her, some curious, some uncomfortable, some openly dismissive. Mensah spoke. "Amara Were is present as a protected witness under the terms of the will." Victor scoffed. "This is absurd." The chair cut him off. "Sit down, Victor." Amara took her seat slowly. Her feet did not reach the floor. Mensah began. "Over the past 6 months," he said calmly, "the estate of Allan Were has been under assessment, not of profit margins, not of market share, but of character." He tapped a remote. The screen behind him lit up. Security footage played clips without sound. Amara walking to school alone before sunrise. A kitchen door closing in her face. A fainting spell at Greenridge Academy. A staged charity event, smiles switching on and off like lights. Gasps filled the room. Victor stood. "This is invasion of privacy." "This," Mensah replied evenly, "is documentation." He switched slides. Financial records appeared, timestamps, authorization codes. The missing scholarship funds, Mensah said, were withdrawn using a legacy access code assigned to Victor Were. Victor's face drained of color. "That's impossible." The code was also accessed from an IP address linked to Lydia Ware's private account. Mensah continued. Lydia's composure cracked for the first time. "You can't prove intent." "I don't need to," Mensah replied. "Only pattern." Daniel stared at the screen, his chest tight. Mensah turned to the board. The will did not ask whether the heirs could manage money. It asked whether they could protect the vulnerable. He paused. They could not. Victor slammed his fist on the table. "You're turning a business assessment into a moral circus." Mensah looked at him steadily. "Your father did that." The room fell quiet. The chair cleared his throat. "Is there additional evidence?" Mensah nodded. "Yes." He turned toward Amara. "Amara," he said gently, "do you understand why you're here?" She nodded. "Would you like to speak?" She hesitated, then stood. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "I don't know about money," she said softly, "or companies. But I know what my father taught me." Victor laughed bitterly. "He wasn't your enough," the chair snapped. Amara continued. "He said that when people think no one is watching, they show who they are." She looked around the room, meeting eyes without accusation. "I stayed because he asked me to." Daniel lowered his head. "I was hungry," Amara said, "and scared. But I didn't leave. Because he said storms show us who stays." She reached into her school bag and pulled out her notebook. "These are my letters," she said. "I wrote to him every day. I didn't ask for help. I just told him the truth." Mensa took the notebook and handed it to the board chair. The chair opened it, read a page, then another. His expression changed. "Is there anything else?" the chair asked quietly. Mensa nodded once more. He pressed a button. The lights dimmed. A video began to play. At first the image was dark. Then a familiar figure stepped into frame. Allan Were, alive, older, thinner, but unmistakably present. A collective gasp filled the room. Someone dropped a pen. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Victor staggered back into his chair. "My name is Allan." Where the video began, his voice steady. "If you are watching this, then my assessment has reached its end." He paused, letting the shock settle. "I faked my death," Allan continued, "because I needed to know who you would become when you believed there were no consequences." Victor sprang to his feet. "This is madness." The chair did not look at him. His eyes were fixed on the screen. "I did not design this test to punish," Allan said. "I designed it to reveal." The video cut to clips of Amara helping another child, writing by lamplight, collapsing and standing again. "She stayed," Allan said quietly, "when all of you walked away." Daniel's shoulders began to shake. "I am not disappointed that you failed a test," Allan continued. "I am disappointed that you failed a child." The screen went black. Silence pressed in from all sides. The chair stood. "This session is adjourned pending immediate actions." Victor tried to speak. No sound came out. Lydia stared at the floor. Daniel rose slowly and walked toward Amara. He stopped in front of her, then knelt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Amara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Outside the boardroom, reporters were already gathering. Inside, the truth had finally found its voice, and it was louder than power. The boardroom did not empty after the video ended. People shifted in their seats, whispered to one another, stared at their hands, as if they no longer trusted what those hands had done. The air felt heavier, charged with a truth that refused to be managed or spun. Victor Were was the first to break the silence. "This is illegal," he said hoarsely. "You can't fake your death and manipulate the market. There are laws." Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah turned to him slowly. "There are," he agreed, "and your father accounted for them." He gestured toward the board chair, who nodded and opened a sealed folder. "Mr. Ware's death was not legally declared," the chair said. "There was no state-issued death certificate, no public filing, no transfer of ownership. What you attended was a private memorial." Victor's mouth opened, then closed. "The markets were notified of an extended medical absence," the chair continued, "which was accurate." Lydia's face had gone pale. "So you let us believe?" "We let you believe what you were eager to believe," Mensah said gently. Daniel sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. He had suspected something, fragments, hints, but not this. Not the scale of it. Amara remained seated, her feet still dangling above the floor. She watched the adults move and speak around her, but her attention drifted back to the video. To Allan's eyes, to the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. He was alive. The realization landed slowly, like rain after drought. Mensa addressed the room again. The purpose of today's session is not spectacle. It is resolution. He clicked the remote. A new slide appeared. Immediate actions, temporary suspension of Victor Were from executive duties. Asset review of all personal transfers linked to Allan Were. Appointment of an interim ethics committee. Protective guardianship provisions for Amara Were. Victor lurched to his feet. You can't do this without my consent. The chair looked at him steadily. We can, and we are. Victor turned toward Daniel, desperation breaking through his anger. You won't let this happen. Tell them. Daniel looked at his brother, then at Amara. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke. I won't stop it. Victor stared at him in disbelief. You're choosing her over your own blood. Daniel's voice shook, but it did not falter. I'm choosing what's right. The word right seemed to echo. Lydia stood slowly. This is all very dramatic, she said, regaining her composure. But let's be practical. Amara is a child. She cannot inherit control of a multinational company. Mensa nodded. Correct, and she won't. Amara looked up confused. Mensa turned to her. Amara, do you remember what your father told you about power? She nodded. He said power should never belong to someone who wants it too much. Mensa smiled faintly. Exactly. He addressed the board. Allan Were did not intend to place control in the hands of a child. He intended to remove control from those who proved unworthy. The chair leaned forward. The founder's final instruction is clear. He read aloud. Effective immediately voting control of Were holdings will be transferred to an independent trust until ethical compliance is restored. Long-term stewardship will be determined based on demonstrated integrity, not lineage. Victor's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the back of his chair to stay upright. And the children, Lydia demanded. What happens to us? The chair met her gaze. You will receive living provisions consistent with the will. No more, no less. Lydia laughed bitterly. So we're punished financially. Mensa corrected her softly. You're limited. Daniel exhaled slowly. A strange mix of grief and relief washed through him. Amara raised her hand. The room paused. Yes, Amara, the chair said gently. She stood, her small shoulders squared. May I ask something? Of course. She looked around the room, then back at Mensa. If my father is alive, why did he let me be hurt? The question cut through the room like glass. Mensa did not answer immediately. From the screen behind them, a new video feed flickered on. Allan Were stepped into frame live this time. The room gasped again. I'll answer that, Allan said quietly. He stood in a simple room, no luxury visible. His hair was grayer than Amara remembered. His eyes were tired. Amara, he said, his voice thick, I thought watching would be enough. I thought distance would protect the truth. He swallowed. I was wrong. Amara felt her chest tighten. I believed that revealing who they were would prevent further harm, Allan continued. I did not realize how much harm could happen so quickly. Tears blurred Amara's vision, but she did not look away. I am sorry, Allan said. Not as a test, not as a lesson, as your father. The room was utterly silent. Victor's face twisted. So this is it. You humiliate us publicly and apologize to her. Allan turned his gaze to the camera. I don't humiliate you, Victor. You did that yourself. He shifted his attention to Lydia. And you taught a child that love is conditional. That is not a mistake. It is a choice. Lydia said nothing. Allan looked back at Amara. You asked me once if leaving meant losing. I told you no. He smiled faintly. You stayed. That was never your job, but you did it anyway. Amara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. Allan breathed out slowly. "Now you are protected. And heard, and free." The chair stood. "This session concludes with the activation of the trust and immediate enforcement of guardianship." Mensa added, "Ms. Grace Mwangi has been approved as interim guardian pending Amara's wishes." Grace covered her mouth, stunned. Amara turned to her, then back to the screen. "Can I still see you?" she asked Allan. "Yes," he said immediately. "Whenever you want." The boardroom doors opened. Security and legal teams moved into position not aggressively, but decisively. Victor sank back into his chair hollow. Lydia stared at her reflection in the glass wall, seeing something she did not recognize. Daniel stepped toward Amara again. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "But I'll be here." Amara nodded once. "Okay." Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware that a quiet revolution had just taken place behind glass walls. Inside, power had shifted not to the loudest voice, but to the smallest one who stayed. And the storm, long promised, had finally cleared the sky. The aftermath of the boardroom revelation did not explode the way Victor had feared. It unfolded slowly, methodically, like a controlled burn designed to leave nothing hidden beneath the ash. Within hours, the trust assumed operational authority over Were holdings. Emails were sent, access credentials revoked, interim leadership announced. The company did not collapse. In fact, the market steadied. Analysts noted the restraint, the transparency. Confidence returned, not in the name Were, but in the structure Allan had built to outlast it. Victor was escorted from the building without handcuffs. He walked past the same reception desk where employees once stood to greet him. No one looked up. The humiliation was quieter than he expected and far more devastating. Lydia returned home alone. She locked herself in her room and began opening drawers, checking accounts, counting what remained. Numbers had always comforted her. That night they did not. Daniel stayed behind. He sat in the empty boardroom long after everyone else had left, staring at the chair Allan used to occupy. He replayed the video in his mind, his father's face when he apologized to Amara. The word sorry echoed louder than any accusation. At the monitored facility, Amara returned to her room with Grace. The space felt different now, not safe or lighter. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Grace said gently. "About guardianship, about school, about anything." Amara nodded. She was tired in a way sleep alone could not fix. That night she opened her notebook. For the first time she did not begin with "Dear Daddy." She stared at the page for a long time, then wrote, "Dear Allan, I saw you today." She paused, unsure how to continue. "You looked older," she added. "I think that happens when people carry too much." She closed the notebook without finishing the letter. Across the city, Allan sat alone in a modest apartment, one he had rented under a different name months earlier. He watched the city lights flicker on, one by one. He had expected relief after revealing himself. What he felt instead was grief. Not for his reputation, not for the company, for time lost. Mensa arrived quietly. "They're processing it," Mensa said. "All of them." Allan nodded. "And the child, she's strong," Mensa replied. "But strength doesn't mean untouched." Allan exhaled slowly. No. The following days brought consequences. Victor's personal accounts were audited. Several irregular transfers were flagged. He was not arrested, but he was exposed. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. The world he had built on proximity to power withdrew without explanation. Lydia faced her own reckoning. The ethics committee recommended formal censure and removal from advisory positions across several boards. Her reputation, once carefully curated, fractured. She responded by retreating, refusing interviews, declining contact. Daniel moved out of the mansion. He took only a suitcase and the letter Allan had written him. He rented a small apartment near the facility where Amara stayed, not to intrude, but to be available. Grace noticed. "He's trying," she said one afternoon as she and Amara watched Daniel leave after dropping off groceries. "In his own way." Amara said nothing. On the fourth day after the board meeting, Allan requested a private meeting with Amara. Grace asked her gently. "Do you want to see him?" Amara considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said, but not alone. The meeting took place in a quiet garden behind the facility. No cameras, no lawyers, no witnesses except Grace, who sat at a distance. Allan arrived early. He stood near a jacaranda tree, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture familiar and unfamiliar all at once. When Amara approached, he did not move toward her. He waited. "Hello," she said. "Hello, Amara," he replied softly. They stood in silence for a long moment. "You're alive?" she said, stating a fact rather than asking a question. "Yes." "You watched?" "Yes." She nodded. "I thought so." He flinched. "You did." She met his eyes. Sometimes when it was very quiet, I felt like someone was listening. Allan swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I thought distance would keep you safe." "I was wrong." Amara looked down at the ground, then back up. "You told me storms show who stays." "Yes, but you left," she said gently. The words were not angry. They were honest. Allan's shoulders sagged. "I did." She took a breath. "I stayed because you asked me to. But I didn't know I was supposed to be brave all the time." Tears blurred Allan's vision. He knelt in front of her, careful not to touch her unless she invited it. "You were never supposed to be brave," he said. "You were supposed to be a child." She considered this. "Can I be one now, yes?" he said immediately. "If you want." Amara nodded once. "Then I don't want to talk about tests anymore," she said. "I want to talk about what happens next." Allan smiled through tears. "That's fair." Over the next week, plans formed slowly, deliberately. Amara chose to remain under Grace's guardianship for the time being. She asked to attend a new school, one closer, smaller, quieter. She asked to keep her notebook. Allan agreed to everything without negotiation. The trust announced a long-term ethics charter embedding protections for dependents and whistleblowers. It was hailed as a model by industry leaders. Victor watched the news from a darkened apartment, bitterness settling into something heavier, regret he did not yet know how to carry. Lydia avoided mirrors. Daniel volunteered at the foundation Allan had once funded quietly. He did not speak of redemption. He showed up. One evening, Amara sat at her desk and opened her notebook again. This time she wrote, "Dear Allan, you don't have to watch anymore. I know where to find you." She closed the book and smiled faintly. The storm had passed. What remained was not perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, Amara felt something she had almost forgotten how to name: peace. The public reckoning came on a Thursday morning under a sky too clear for mercy. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Were Holdings' main auditorium. By 9, the room was full. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters whispered checking notes, refreshing feeds. Outside security held back a crowd that had gathered since dawn. No one knew exactly what would be said. Everyone knew it would change something. Victor Were arrived early and took a seat in the second row, jaw-clenched hands folded tightly in his lap. He had not slept. The world had been shrinking around him for days, and now it pressed in from every angle. Lydia arrived moments later, sunglasses hiding eyes that had not looked at themselves in a mirror since the board meeting. Daniel slipped in quietly and sat near the aisle alone. Amara arrived last. She walked in with Miss Grace Mwangi, her steps measured, her shoulders squared. She wore a simple dress and carried her school bag. When she entered, a ripple moved through the room. Some faces softened, others hardened. She did not look for Victor or Lydia. She did not look for Daniel. She looked straight ahead. Mr. Joseph Kofi Mensah took the podium first. He waited until the room settled and then spoke in a calm, even tone. "Thank you for coming. Today is not about scandal. It is about accountability." He gestured toward the screen behind him. "Before I continue, there is someone you need to hear from." The lights dimmed. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then Allan Were stepped onto the stage. Not on a screen, in person. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, flashing lights. Someone swore out loud. Another dropped a phone. Victor shot to his feet, blood draining from his face. Lydia's sunglasses slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Allan raised one hand. The noise fell away, stunned into silence. "I'm alive," Allan said simply. "And I'm here to speak for myself." He stood tall but unadorned, no suit, no tie. Just a man who had decided to stop hiding. "I faked my death," Allan continued, his voice steady, "because I needed to know what would happen when the power I held disappeared." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I did not do this lightly," he said. "I did it because I had failed to answer a question that matters more than money." He turned slightly, his gaze finding Amara in the front row. "Who would stay?" he said, when staying cost something. Victor stepped forward. "You destroyed us," he said hoarsely. "You humiliated your own children." Allan looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "No," Allan replied. "I revealed you." He faced the audience again. "Over 6 months, my estate was assessed. Not for profit, for principle. You have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimony." He gestured to Mensah, who advanced the slide's images already familiar. Amara walking alone, the charity performance, the financial records. "This is not a story about villains," Allan said. "It is a story about choices." He paused. "When my adopted daughter Amara was isolated, hungry and frightened, she did not leave. She did not bargain. She did not accuse." Amara's fingers tightened on her bag. "She stayed," Allan said, his voice thickening, "because I asked her to believe that kindness matters even when it isn't rewarded." He turned to Victor and Lydia. "You treated her as an obstacle, as a variable, as a risk." Daniel lowered his head. "And you," Allan said. Looking at Daniel, hesitated. "Which is human. But you did not step forward until the cost was public." Daniel flinched, then nodded once, accepting the truth of it. Allan faced the room again. "So here is the outcome." Mensah stepped forward and read from a prepared statement. "Effective immediately, voting control of Were Holdings remains with the independent trust. Victor Were is permanently removed from executive roles. Lydia Were is barred from advisory positions pending ethics review. Daniel Were will retain no special privileges, but may serve under oversight if he chooses." A wave of murmurs swept the room. And Amara Were Mensah continued, is recognized as the sole family member who met the ethical threshold of the founder's will. Cameras swung toward her. Allan lifted a hand again. "This does not mean Amara will run a company. It means she will never be treated as disposable again." He stepped closer to the front row, stopping a respectful distance from her. "Amara," he said gently, "you owe no one forgiveness. You owe no one silence. What you choose next is yours." She stood. The room held its breath again. "I don't want anything from the company," Amara said, her voice small but steady. "I want to go to school. I want to sleep without being afraid. And I want my family to stop hurting people because they think they can." Silence followed. Victor's shoulders slumped. Lydia closed her eyes. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. Allan nodded. Then that is what will happen. He turned back to the cameras. This ends today. Reporters surged with questions, but Mensa signaled the end. Security moved in not to remove anyone, but to restore order. As the room emptied, Victor remained seated, staring at the floor. Lydia left without a word. Daniel approached Amara and stopped a few steps away. I know I can't fix it, he said quietly, but I'm here. Amara studied him for a moment. Then stay, she said. Just stay. He nodded. Outside, the story exploded across screens and headlines. But inside the auditorium, something quieter settled into place. Allan knelt beside Amara. Are you okay? She nodded, then hesitated. I think so. He smiled faintly. That's enough for today. As they walked out together, father and daughter, the crowd parted without instruction. Power had spoken, and for once it had chosen the smallest voice that refused to leave. The world moved quickly after the truth came out. Too quickly. News cycles churned. Analysts debated ethics. Social media split itself into outrage and applause. Headlines used words like betrayal experiment, genius cruelty. None of them quite fit. Inside the quiet spaces where consequences actually lived, time slowed. Amara returned to a smaller life. Not the recovery facility, not the mansion on Ngong Road. A modest house with a garden that smelled of soil after rain. A bedroom with a window that faced the sunrise. A desk by the wall where she could write without fear of someone taking her notebook away. Ms. Grace Mwangi moved in as her legal guardian, though Amara rarely used the word. To her, Grace was simply there in the mornings, at the school gate during nightmares that still came without warning. Allan did not move in. That was deliberate. I want you to choose me, he told Amara one afternoon as they walked through the garden. Not because I'm powerful, not because I'm sorry, but because you feel safe. Amara thought about that for a long time. I do feel safe, she said eventually, but I don't want to feel watched anymore. Allan nodded. Then I'll stay close enough to hear you, far enough to let you breathe. He kept his promise. He visited twice a week. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. He learned to sit in silence without trying to fix it, to listen without explaining, to apologize without adding reasons. That more than any speech or press conference was his real reckoning. Victor's fall was quieter than the world expected. There were no handcuffs, no dramatic arrests, just doors that stopped opening. Consulting firms declined meetings. Former allies stopped returning calls. Invitations dried up. The power he had worn like armor vanished, leaving him exposed to something he had never learned how to handle. Ordinary consequence. One evening, he stood alone in the apartment he could no longer afford and stared at his reflection in a dark window. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had avoided his entire life. If I had stayed, would any of this be different? There was no one left to answer. Lydia chose exile of a different kind. She left the country quietly, citing personal reasons. She joined boards where her name still carried weight, but not trust. Every room she entered now came with a pause, a recalculation. She told herself she was misunderstood. But some nights when she lay awake, she remembered Amara's small voice in the boardroom. I stayed, and the memory burned. Daniel stayed. He stayed in Nairobi, stayed close to the foundation, stayed available. He volunteered at shelters his father once funded anonymously. He worked under supervision without special access or shortcuts. When people recognized his name, he did not correct their assumptions or demand respect. He learned how to wait. Sometimes he sat on a bench near Amara's school and read until dismissal time. He never approached unless she waved first. One afternoon she did. He walked over carefully, as if approaching a fragile animal. "Do you want to get ice cream?" he asked. She thought for a moment. Yes. They walked in silence. It was not forgiveness. It was a beginning. Where holdings stabilized under the trust, ethics became more than a document. Whistleblower protections were enforced. Dependent welfare clauses became mandatory across subsidiaries. Other companies followed. Not because Allan Were was brilliant, but because the cost of ignoring the lesson had become public. Allan watched these changes from a distance. He did not reclaim the spotlight. He did not give interviews beyond one final statement: power reveals who we are when no one is watching. Love reveals who we are when it costs us something. That was all. On Amara's 10th birthday, there was no party. Just a cake in the kitchen. Grace humming softly. Allan standing awkwardly with a single wrapped gift. Amara opened it slowly. Inside was a new notebook. The cover was plain. No lock, no inscription. "All the old letters are still yours," Allan said quickly. "This is just for what comes next." Amara traced the edge of the pages. "Thank you," she said. That night she wrote her last letter in the old notebook. "Dear Daddy, you don't have to test me anymore. I know who I am." She closed it and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk. Then she opened the new notebook and wrote something different. A story. Not about storms, not about tests, but about a girl who stayed not because she had to, but because she believed kindness was real, even when the world tried to teach her otherwise. Weeks later, as Amara walked home from school with Grace, she asked a question that had been forming quietly inside her. "Do you think people can change?" Grace considered it. "I think some people can," she said, "if they're willing to sit with what they've done." Amara nodded. "I hope so." She did not say who she was thinking about. In the distance, the city moved on, busy, imperfect, alive. But in a small house with a garden and a desk by the window, something rare had taken root. Not justice that shouts, but justice that heals. This story is not really about a billionaire who faked his death. It is about what remains when power disappears. When money, titles, and protection are stripped away, people are revealed in their simplest form. Some grow cruel, some grow silent, and some, often the smallest, the weakest, the least protected, choose to stay human anyway. Amara did not stay because she was brave. She stayed because she believed kindness was real, even when it hurt. She stayed because she was taught that character matters more than reward. And in a world where adults failed her repeatedly, she proved that integrity does not require age, strength, or authority, only choice. Allan Were learned a painful truth too, that systems can reveal corruption, but they cannot replace presence. Watching from a distance may expose wrongdoing, but love requires showing up. His greatest wealth was not the company he built, but the humility he learned too late and then chose to act on. Victor and Lydia remind us of something uncomfortable. Evil does not always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like convenience, like silence, like choosing comfort over courage. Their punishment was not prison, but something far more difficult to escape: being seen for who they truly were. And Daniel's journey matters because it shows us this hesitation is human. But staying hesitant forever is a decision. Redemption does not begin with words. It begins with showing up again and again without guarantees. At its heart, this story asks a simple question that applies to all of us. When someone weaker than you needs protection and there is no reward for doing the right thing, who do you become? If this story moved, you take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been Amara, staying kind in a place that didn't deserve you? Or have you ever been someone who looked away, hoping the problem would solve itself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And tell us, what country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? We love reading where our community is tuning in from. If you believe in stories about justice, healing, and the quiet power of doing what's right, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes the smallest voice that refuses to leave is the one that changes everything.